Have you ever stayed somewhere and felt like you weren't alone, even when the place was supposed to be empty? Like someone else was in the house, quietly watching, just out of sight? I used to think it was just an overactive imagination, but what happened last winter, I'm not so sure anymore. It all started when I agreed to sit for my aunt. She lived in a big old house, the kind that creaks and groans with every gust of wind. It wasn't creepy, though. Not at first. In fact, I had always loved her place. It had charm, character, a fireplace, big windows that looked out into the woods, and rooms that felt like they held 100 years of stories. My aunt was leaving for a couple of weeks, heading to Florida for the winter to escape the cold. She asked me to stay at her house, look after it, and make sure everything was in order. I didn't hesitate. I needed a break from my cramped apartment, and her house felt like the perfect retreat. Quiet, peaceful, and far from the noise of the city. The first few days were uneventful. I worked from my laptop during the day, sat by the fire in the evenings, and occasionally took walks through the woods behind the house. It felt like a mini vacation, a chance to recharge. But on the fourth night, something strange happened. I was lying in bed, reading a book, when I heard it, a soft creak, like someone stepping on the floorboards downstairs. My aunt's house was old, so it wasn't unusual for it to make noise, but this was different. It was rhythmic, like footsteps, slow and deliberate. At first, I thought maybe I had imagined it. I paused, holding my breath, and listened. The house was silent again, save for the wind rattling the windows. I went back to my book, but the feeling of unease lingered. I tried to convince myself it was just the house settling, or maybe a draft causing the floorboards to shift. But the sound stuck with me, gnawing at the back of my mind. The next night, it happened again. This time, I was downstairs in the living room, sitting by the fire, when I heard it. The same slow, deliberate creaking, as if someone was walking down the hallway upstairs. My stomach tightened, and I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I put down my book and listened, straining to hear over the crackling of the fire. Creak, creak, creak. The footsteps stopped, and then nothing. I tried to laugh it off. Old houses make noise, I told myself out loud, the sound of my own voice oddly comforting in the empty room. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just the house. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to every sound the house made. Every creak, every groan, every whisper of wind felt like it was hiding something. And then, around 2 the footsteps started again. They were louder this time, closer. I sat up in bed, my heart racing. The footsteps were coming down the hallway, moving slowly, almost cautiously. I held my breath, my eyes fixed on the bedroom door. I couldn't see anything from where I was, but I could hear it. Someone, or something, was outside my door. The footsteps stopped just outside the room, and for what felt like an eternity, everything was silent. I was frozen in place, my heart pounding so loud I thought whoever was outside could hear it. I stared at the door, waiting for it to open, but it never did. After what felt like hours, I finally worked up the courage to get out of bed. I grabbed my phone for light and slowly walked toward the door. My hand shook as I reached for the doorknob. My mind racing with 1,000 worst-case scenarios. I swung the door open, my heart in my throat. But the hallway was empty. There was no one there. I stepped into the hallway, my phone casting long, eerie shadows on the walls. The house was silent again, but the air felt heavy, like something was lingering just out of sight. I checked every room, every closet, every corner. Nothing. I went back to bed, but sleep was out of the question. The next day, I told myself I was being paranoid. I was alone in a big, empty house, and my mind was playing tricks on me. but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't really alone. That night, I locked the bedroom door. I fell asleep around midnight, but a few hours later, I woke up to the sound of knocking. It was soft at first, barely audible, but it grew louder. I sat up in bed, my heart racing. The knocking was coming from the other side of the bedroom door. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. I stared at the door, too scared to move. The knocking stopped, and then the doorknob turned. It rattled for a moment, as if someone was trying to open the door, but the lock held. I couldn't breathe. Whoever, or whatever, was on the other side of the door stood there for what felt like an eternity. I could hear the soft shuffle of footsteps, the faint creak of the floorboards, and then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, I packed my things and left. I didn't care about watching the house anymore. I wasn't going to stay there another night. I called my aunt, made up some excuse about work, and left the house behind. A few days later, my aunt called me. She thanked me for staying at the house and asked if everything had been okay. I hesitated, not sure how to explain what I had experienced, but then she said something that sent a chill down my spine. Oh, by the way, I hope you didn't mind the guest room. Sometimes people say they feel like they're not alone when they stay there. It's funny. My housekeeper swears there's a presence in that room. I froze, the memory of the footsteps, the knocking, the turning doorknob flooding back. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Well, the house is old," she said with a laugh. "I guess people get a little spooked sometimes. They say they hear things, see things, like someone else is there with them. It's probably just their imagination." I hung up the phone, my hands shaking. It wasn't just my imagination. I knew that now. I haven't been back to my aunt's house since, and I don't plan on it. Whatever, or whoever was there that night is still there waiting, and I'm not going back to find out who it is.